right. Well, it's good to be back together. Regular meeting. Everyone could make it this evening. We see the seasons change out there almost suddenly over the weekend. And it looks like I'm offering the prayer tonight, so I'm glad to do so. You all bow your heads. Heavenly Father, we give you grateful thanks for the privilege of coming together tonight, convening, meeting, discussing, voting, being able to self-govern. And God, we're grateful for that. Grateful for that freedom we have here. Pray that you continue to stir in the hearts of not just our residents, but all across this country, the love and the devotion to freedom and to the idea of liberty and the experiment that is ongoing now here some 250 years later. May we play some small part in that in ways that don't always seem obvious, street lights and paths and things of that nature. I just pray that we would have wisdom in those things which are discretionary, and Lord, those things that seem mandatory, may we stand firmly with. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
If you could join us now for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty
and justice for all.
Thank you. May be seated. Indicated earlier, everyone is here this evening. And item 5 is calling for the approval of the agenda. So is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Support.
With supported comments, questions, additions? All right. Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 And the agenda is passed. Item 6, communication letters and reports received for information this evening. Item 7, public comment for any of those who are here this evening who wish to address items on the board's agenda tonight. You're welcome to do so. I know that we also have staff that are here to address a point on that agenda. You can wait until that point is called, but for those of you who come just from the general public, this is an opportunity. Okay. Seeing none, we'll close that initial public comment period. We'll have another one later in the meeting for the public for any item that you may wish to bring to our attention. Item 8, consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda?
So moved.
Support.
Moved and supported. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And it is passed. Item 9, addendum to early voting agreement. I believe came out of the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners and a change to what we'd earlier looked at. I'm sure you've all looked at that addendum. Is there a motion to approve that addendum tonight to the voting agreement?
So moved.
Support.
Supported. Anyone wish to comment on that?
I think this will be the last one. Come on, Amber.
I think at this point, yes.
Yeah.
There may be a change to the time on Sundays because we're having a difficulty finding locations
Sure.
for Sundays. Other than that, I don't see anything changing.
Good.
I didn't disagree with a number of those changes. It looks like it strengthened some of the security and took away some of it seemed like some discretion that you may not want people unilaterally exercise in their own townships or cities. Anybody, any issues, problems, debate? If there are none, then I'll call for the vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And the addendum is approved. Item 10, an ordinance or a proposed change to the township zoning ordinance. Does anyone wish to make a motion?
So moved. Support.
Okay, this came out of Planning Commission. Pretty targeted, pretty narrow changes to several provisions, which I assume, those were given birth by some specific incidents. Who's our Planning Commission? Is it Gary? Yeah, Gary?
I am.
Anything you wish to...
A lot of stuff just lines up with some of the state changes that's made, especially when it comes to signs. This is coming up, and there was some changes as far as, if I remember right, daycare. But other than that, we're trying to make things a little bit cleaner in our zoning at the same time. Kevin's our zoning administrator. He can add to that if I'm something else. Huh? Anything else you want to add to what I just said about our changes to zoning? Seeing as you're here, you may as well give a speech.
Good evening to the board. Kevin Austin, zoning administrator for this great township. The section that we're talking about right now is a couple of the, I kind of direct you guys' attention to that main paragraph in the staff report that was provided, which is to address grammatical omissions and clarify certain things and try to make things a little more concise for us on an enforcement front and also just some mistakes that were made. There was quite a few omissions in there where the language said one thing and then the actual stipulations under it, whether it's the HS zoning district for the open air businesses or the not being an ag district for open air businesses and things like that, we just cleared that up. It's a couple of those ones. The last one on the daycare, we had a special land use permit that they were applying and they basically were trying to meet all of our standards, and we had an engineer that was working in the same light, and he said, hey, we didn't have these queuing spaces on some of these other early learning centers, and the planning commission kind of agreed that basically the operating procedure of most early learning centers and things like that nowadays aren't requiring or are requiring guardians to come in and have an administrative practice where they're dropping the kids off more often, and almost everybody agreed that that's what they've seen. It's for safety, for better administrative practices. So we got rid of the queuing space requirement that's stipulated in our parking for daycare centers there. But yeah, if there's any questions regarding those.
I appreciate the periodic tightening, right? Clarifying, tightening, correcting. It just makes the ordinance, makes all our ordinances better as we periodically review them. So sometimes they're brought to our attention. Sometimes we purposely just say, you know what, we haven't looked at this in a while. Let's just read through it and see if it makes sense. So appreciate it.
Problem.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any thoughts among the board? Like I say, they're pretty discrete changes. This is a roll call vote. It's a resolution.
Mr. Swam? Yes. Ms. Steele?
Yes.
Clerk is a yes. Supervisor?
Yes.
Treasurer?
Yes.
Mr. Belding?
Yes.
Ms. Grassman?
Yes.
And the yeas have it. All right. Number 11. Now we will probably need Kevin again here, as well as maybe Rich, but this is a major recommended overhaul to our sign ordinance from the Planning Commission. And someone who wishes to place this particular ordinance change.
I move that we approve this as recommended by the Planning Commission.
Support.
It moved and supported. Boy, if there's one thing, and I think you probably have noticed it as well, that comes up, especially election years, but not always, other times too, it is the sign ordinance and sign issues and sign questions, whether they be business or personal or things at your house. And so I know it's a hot topic that, Rich, you deal with fairly often, over the years. So this is a major revision, though, that I've seen to this particular ordinance. So that's why we're grateful that you both came, and I think because you are here and you're a good resource for us, if it's all right with the board, I'd like to allow Rich and Kevin both, if they wish, to address the impetus behind this, what you're trying to accomplish, some of what you think will make the function of this ordinance better because of the changes, wholesale changes.
So the impetus kind of to go through this is different from other kind of sign ordinance changes that might come around when there might be an issue that comes up in the township or specific events or something like that. This one was really designed to address not inefficiency, but the risk that we were taking on as a township after Gilbert versus Arizona with the Supreme Court ruling that ruled that our sign ordinances on the municipal level should not be regulated by content. So there was many hours of work put in between Rich Naraki, our code enforcement officer, and our township attorney, Crystal Morgan, to develop an ordinance that reduces and eliminates, where it can, all content-related sign ordinances, basically, so that we can avoid that. Some of the materials that I provided kind of details what happened with Gilbert versus Arizona as an example. The town regulated churches' temporary directional signs differently than other non-commercial signs. For example, while the town of Gilbert allowed nonprofit event signs to be displayed for 12 hours prior to the event and 1 hour after the event, the town allowed political signs to be displayed for a limited length of time prior to an election, required to be removed 10 days after the election. The Supreme Court found that these types of distinctions that are based on the content of the sign favored certain types of signs, i.e. speech, violated the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. So we had some components that were highlighted as being content-based inside the township ordinance, and that put us at a risk of costly and unnecessary litigation should it be challenged. Therefore, the ordinance must be amended to achieve content neutrality and to lower the risk to the greatest extent possible. The proposed amendment regulates non-content aspects of signs, such as sign height, area, number per lot, setback, placement, materials, and lighting. So that's the thing that you can kind of notice throughout there. Like I said, the primary objective was to reduce the content, to achieve content neutrality where we could, based off of that Supreme Court ruling. So the township attorney had given us a copy and given us a draft of what she believed would reduce the risk for the most that we could, and that was presented to the Planning Commission prior to my time, actually, in August, and then that was approved for public hearing. Unfortunately, during the changeover and things like that, we couldn't get around to it to get it on the agenda, but we did get it on the agenda last meeting in September, and where we revised it again and had a good discussion on it, and it was recommended for approval.
So the attorney was involved, obviously.
Yes.
Did the attorney start from scratch and say, look, here's one that has passed muster, or that we think is a suitable alternative, and let's modify it to fit? Or was it, let's work with your ordinance and see what is it about your ordinance that needs to either change or be improved?
So that's basically the majority of it, is that it is the stuff that was not deemed to be, non-content, basically, or content neutral, was kept. And so that we did keep the majority of our sign ordinance, that there were no changes to throughout the years, the little changes that we did have, but most of that was kept if it was considered to be content neutral or didn't put us at a risk. And then we implemented the changes that Crystal had thought would work for us, with temporary signs and exempted signs and things like that.
So the Gilbert case and content neutrality was the primary driving force behind these changes. That's what this is meant to address, or was it that's one aspect of the changes, and some of these origin of changes comes from just past experiences or input from Rich, or are we doing other things with the ordinance too, or is it all driven by this issue to avoid litigation over the content?
Basically all the changes are modifications to achieve content neutrality, and none of them we really didn't, as a planning commission or or myself didn't recommend any changes that weren't to meet that end, and to address that issue. So, basically all the steps that we made, Rich had multiple meetings with Crystal in regard to that, so it is all motivated based off of Gilbert.
I'm curious, did Crystal say she's doing this almost like a cottage industry now for cities and townships all over the area? Is it commonplace that,
Yeah, that I'm not sure of.
Okay, that's when this case was so significant that everyone's having to reevaluate.
That is what I'm hearing across, MTA and in different associations and things like that, is if you haven't addressed these things, and that was what was recommended by MML, the Michigan Municipal League, that if you haven't addressed these things, you should, because especially in the time that we're living in now, next year, especially, and things like that, it's going to get, even more divisive in some cases, and people will, be expressing their attitudes and everything. And so, if you start challenging those things, if you don't have the ordinances ready to do that, then you could put yourself at a loss.
I know I want to hear from Rich, but before we do, anyone questions for Kevin or comments? Rich, could we hear from you as well? And Kevin, stand by. Thanks for coming.
Not a problem.
Yeah. I'm just curious from the outset, what do you most commonly come up against as it relates to our sign ordinance and challenges to it?
biggest thing probably, the biggest challenge is usually placement. However, in the last couple of years, it was the content. I think many of you are aware we got a problem resident that basically says whatever he wants and puts it out there. It's protected under the First Amendment. So neighbors have disputes over that of the message that's being sent out, excessive amount of signs in the for the last couple of years when we had certain movements occurring throughout the country. One person would put up a sign supporting that. Neighbors didn't like that support. So those are the types of complaints that we're getting. So the message, excessive amount of signs, and placement of signs are probably the three most common types of complaints that I receive.
And you believe that these changes address all three of those common concerns?
I believe they do. I believe in changing. I mean, we can't. We're probably allowing the U.S. Supreme Court is allowing people to say more and giving them more First Amendment rights. So we won't be regulating what the message says, but we are attempting not only to avoid the content judgment, but also regulate that it's not your front yard, your property's not overly obsessed with 10, 20, 30 signs. So there were changes in some of the square footage that was allowed, the number of signs that were allowed, to allow people to still express themselves but not make it a sign factory out in their front yard, if you would. And I believe the changes, we went through some model procedures that were written up by the Michigan Municipal League. There was a study put out by Michigan State University on zoning with signs. We referred to that. Crystal had actually just returned from a conference that had a big emphasis on that. So it was a number of different resources we used. What we put together, what we're bringing you, is what we feel is the best policy for our township. Different places may take a different approach, but we think from an enforcement standpoint, which in talking with Kevin will still be strictly, for the most part, reactive and complaint driven. And for the issues that we have here, we believe this ordinance will be good for how we want to proceed.
I'm glad to hear we can curtail to some degree, the amount of signs, the size of signs, and so on. I mean, some sort of a clawback in this process. I wouldn't consider the Michigan Municipal League or Michigan State to be as aligned with this township in terms of liberal versus conservative, but I think it's probably still an accurate reading of what the Supreme Court has ruled. And unfortunately, that is the case, that your first liberty and your First Amendment rights extend apparently past my rights as a parent to protect my child from reading some of the garbage you put up, And I don't mean you personally, Rich, but they're picking winners and losers, it seems, when it comes to some of those issues, and it just is what it is, unfortunately.
In the articles I mentioned, we certainly didn't copy their procedures that they recommend. We just use them as a tool, and we took our current ordinance and we just fine-tuned it for us. So a lot of it was some of the changes we created, some we just moved around and reworded. But the context of the ordinance, we did not change that to completely go off the rails. We just brought it up so it's in compliance with the Supreme Court ruling.
Sure. I'm glad we haven't given a platform to certain citizens in that respect. Hope that it would die away, but we'll see. Gary, Planning Commission, you're involved in this?
We had some long meetings. No, I think it was Rich and Kevin. Prior to Kevin was Victor. We did a lot of due diligence. We basically just tried to line up with the Supreme Court. We didn't really make a lot of changes to sign sizes and placement and that kind of thing. We're just trying to line up with the free speech amendment that affected wherever it could. So
there was a lot to read through.
Yeah.
Just saying. Glad we have you guys for that. Thank you.
I'm sorry, am I reading this? So the previous ordinance was 80 square feet of total sign per parcel. And is that being changed to 32? Is that what I'm right? The total aggregate sign is being changed from 80 to 32? I'm trying to read. I would say political signs, no more than 80 square feet, but I don't see political signs in a different location again.
So the
G. That one? G, yep. But then I don't see them referenced in here. Other than the total aggregate sign for temporary signs. I mean, I guess it would be a temporary versus political.
Isn't that the whole point of the ruling, that it
Do you see it referenced?
It got taken out here. Is it mentioned in?
It's not mentioned again.
I thought.
The other aspect. Like, so it's section G. So hypothetically speaking, if you have one of those bigger 4x8 signs, you cannot have another sign in your yard based on the current, the new one. I'm just doing math right here. Because I don't see it referenced.
Isn't the point of the Supreme Court ruling that you can't differentiate political signs from
Yes.
others?
What we changed was total, because he referenced the fact that it's to limit the amount of signs as well, but we cut it down from, I mean, if I'm reading this right, because it says 80 here, 80
It's like
square feet,
we brought
all the way down
political,
to 32.
we brought political down to non-political instead of somehow meeting in the middle, was my impression.
So it must be under temporary signs, section 6, is it? Meaning we don't any longer identify them as political signs because that's
Yeah, because it doesn't say
created
political.
Yeah.
It would be classified as maybe it's temporary, because it goes from section G cut down to, it'd be automatically section 1 then. I think that's a pretty substantial cut, but that's just me.
I remember that discussion. And that was to do with, much more with residential building. We talked about it, and Rich, we talked about, being able to put a 4x8 sign in front of every house in a plat that's for sale. And so we brought down the aggregate number of square footage so that there could be a real estate sign and maybe a builder sign, because some of these places were just getting out of hand, and we're trying to figure out how we could do that. I can tell it was a long night when we did this, because there's so many things to deal with, and you go, a 4x8 is 32 square feet, and so we were trying to figure out how to do that. And I don't think the discussion, if I remember right, was around the residential building. It was a long ways back too, by the way, because I think Victor was still our planning guy when we started this whole conversation. And because of the transition over to Kevin, that thing kind of like got extended out, because the Supreme Court thing came out soon after the sign thing. So just to let you know, there's the history of that footage was because of the signs were getting out of hand in some of our residential areas. And that was why that got brought down.
So portable sign seems to be the phrase used, it appears in the graph down below. So no longer use the word political, because that sounds content-based.
So with that, we removed anything that referred to content. So realty signs are no longer in there, political signs are no longer in there. Anything that was named after that went into the temporary signs. We did look at a lot of different sizes and discuss that. We discussed what is the largest typical sign that a township would see, and what do we see here? And that would be the election type signs, the 32 square feet. Are there larger ones? Yes, but they're the exceptions. If we went back and made them any larger, as was mentioned, every house could have 80 square foot signs going down the entire block, and we have no mechanism to regulate what they say. This way, if in an election year they're supporting a candidate, the candidate can decide, I want 132 square foot, or I want multiple signs that equal up to 32 square feet. But we're not going to have the complaints that we had where the person has 17 political signs and has 300 square feet of signs there because they were exempted at the time, because they were up during the election cycle.
Yeah.
So,
that was Bill Moore's house back in the day.
After again reviewing it, discussing what type of complaints we were getting, what seems to work for our township, we believe that 32 square feet is fair to the user of it, but it also is not excessive within a neighborhood.
Okay. So if kid has a 4x8 sign in my neighbor's yard,
got 10 of them.
someone comes along and wants to put,
I mean, that's why automatically I'm like, I got 10 of them. I already know I do.
wants to cut the corner of it. To cut the corner of one of yours to
Cut edges off, I guess.
I think that's
I just think it's a little drastic, but.
one of the things that was brought up too at the end of the conversation was we are complaint driven. And so we said, hey, if there's 32 square feet or 34 square feet, nobody calls, we're not going to go out and start measuring signs. We're complaint driven. We're not ordinance driven. So that's the difference. We talked about that too. I remember that conversation too. We had that with you and the planning commission. Because we went back and forth a lot of these things that night. That's what we agreed upon. So.
Correct. We discussed that again. The enforcement on this is complaint driven. It's not me out there with a tape measure. But again, it wouldn't also be only complaint driven. If we had that house that has 50 signs placed and it's just a bad situation, we would have some action on that, but.
We can essentially be the complainant, right?
Yes.
Because that's still complaint driven, it's just
Right.
it hitting our radar, hitting your radar for the complaint versus.
Correct.
So did the planning commission discuss how big the lot is based on this? Because, yeah, this sounds great for somebody on a quarter of an acre in a subdivision, but if somebody's got 10 acres, it's a different scenario.
Vince, I'll think you want your ordinance for the township.
I have more speech.
If we got to cover every little thing,
Well,
the book's going to be this thick.
It's a pretty simple process, and common sense should have dictated at the meeting that if somebody's got, just like there was discussion years ago, I said, a small little, 800 square foot shop gets the same size square footage for signage as a 100,000 square foot building. The ordinance needs to exercise some common sense and say, okay, each case is different. We don't need to specify every single possible scenario, but just the basics that common sense would say, yeah, that makes sense. A percentage, pretty simple stuff, but because I could see that being an issue with somebody with lots of land. They got 10 acres and 1,200 linear feet of frontage. That's different than somebody with a 98-foot front lot in a subdivision.
It's tough because to the extent you see signs of speech and you look at it just through that prism and say, we're trying to be content neutral and so on and so forth, then the guy with a bigger lot gets more speech, which I get your point. What speech for what though? I mean, they've got a business to market or they got a industrial warehouse to fill or what have you, But it's hard to distinguish that between that person's use for business purpose and that person's use for political. We get back into content again.
Right, it's not content.
Tricky. Huh?
It's not content.
I just want to make sure then. So if you were to have a business have a sign that's probably already close to 32 square feet, they could not put up a political sign in their front yard based on that, correct? Because they would have their main sign plus an additional sign that would be in violation.
Maybe Kevin can answer this, but the way we dealt with it, we didn't touch any of that section with other signs, larger signs, business signs. That was not part of it. So you could have your business sign, and then because it's a temporary sign, you would still be allowed the 32 square foot temporary sign as long as your initial business sign was approved. We didn't have to change that. That wasn't part of the Supreme Court ruling. So you would still qualify for all your additional signs plus the additional 32 square feet.
So political signs would classify as a temporary sign then?
Temporary or portable, yeah.
Both?
Yeah, temporary.
I still see some.
So the temporary sign, the 32 square feet, we're going to call a temporary sign, which were the political, the real estate, the yard sales, the garage sales. The portable signs are the ones that fall into the rentals. They get pulled out. They got the wording on them. They
Slide your letters in.
and so they get a permit for those for the businesses. Open house this weekend, grand opening, whatever that may be. That's under the portable signs, which is still a permit is required. All the things we had before that, garage, all the content stuff all now fall under the temporary 32 square feet.
Is there a time frame on a temporary sign though? That they can be out? I'm just looking at, you could see, just from both sides. There's a lot of the signs that say, in this house, blah, blah, blah. We'll just say, is that still classified as a temporary sign? Because by definition, it could only be up 60 days then. I'm just trying to find the little loopholes in this, because if now ideologies are falling into the temporary sign category, they can only be up for 60 days.
They can be up for 60 days.
And they'd have to be removed.
Come down
for 30 days.
But we won't know what it says, because technically we can't read. We're going to read it. We're going to know what it says.
Well, I know.
We can't enforce it and say after 60 days it has a motivational message or an ideological message. Mm-hmm. We don't care what it says. That sign hasn't moved for 60 days. It needs to come down for 30. If it's gone after 58 days and it gets put up back within a week, our discussion has been the clock starts over again.
Does it have to come down for 30 days, or does it have to be moved?
Down for 30 days.
It has to be removed.
So could I move a sign that's just an ideology? Can I move it from the left side of my driveway to the right side of my driveway every 60 days?
Still be out.
59 days.
Every 59. We move signs whenever we mow the lawn.
Yes.
But
my initial belief on that was, if it was complaint driven, you're probably not going to get enforcement action on that. That would comply. As again, I think you're well aware of 2 or 3 properties in the township that we have had long-standing issues with what a lot of people think are inappropriate signs. That was added in there, so we have a way to go after maybe something that, is not the most appropriate thing to be displayed. Right now they can leave it up forever. We kind of added that so we have some type of tool to address unique situations there. The breakdown on the synopsis of the Supreme Court case didn't really address a time frame. Mm-hmm. It's recommended, they think that could be challenged in the future. They were recommending a minimal 60-day window if you were going to put a time frame on it. So that's what we went with. It wasn't decided in that Supreme Court thing, but they think there will be future rulings. There's been some Court of Appeals in the Sixth Circuit, which covers Michigan, and also in Michigan some court cases that are discussing time frames. We believe we're safe with a 6-month window. It's not violating their rights, and we would continue to monitor that. If the courts rule differently, we would just update our ordinance accordingly.
Interesting. So by being complaint-driven, it would seem to provide us protection against the argument of selective enforcement, because that's what you could still run into. Yeah, you've got these content-neutral requirements, but they're selectively enforced against these people with these types of signs and not those, right? And so if it's complaint-driven, and complaints are coming in about a particular sign or type of sign or whatever, and you're enforcing it, and there are other signs maybe with a different point of view that are not being complained of, be curious to me whether they could say we're selectively enforcing, or if you say no, we're just simply doing as we always do. We respond to complaints, and if we hear about others, we'll respond to those as well.
I believe we're safe there, that with that response, if we're responding to the complaints that a citizen initiated or was submitted through the township, not us doing it, because that's the whole basis of this case is the city that did go out and enforce it. They were only picking on one organization and letting everyone else get away with it at their own will. They weren't doing it based on a complaint. They were just going out enforcing it. I think it's safe like that with any other complaint. If somebody parks their RV in their driveway and we get a complaint, we tell those people they have to move it. Well, why don't you tell the other 135, 155 that are in the township? But we don't have somebody upset about those other ones. And so we're addressing the citizens on both levels. One, the person who's upset by it and bringing the compliance, but then not going out and enforce it. So I think we would be safe that if we respond to complaint driven, and we're not taking the attack approach and going to get them, it would withstand the standards.
Yeah, and for lawsuit defense purposes, you keep track of the complaints you receive. You've got some record, some way of organizing and retaining.
Yes, all of our complaints are attached to the addresses through our BSNA system. We have notes in there that any of the staff that works on these cases, we put in what we did, why we did it, who we talked to. So there's notes in the system showing what we do.
Kevin, can I ask you your opinion concerning individual that owns acres versus someone that has a lot and they have the same standard? Is that a concern?
I don't believe it's a concern just because, they all have frontage, and the frontage is really where people target the signs, I would say, or, the main concern for a sign ordinance is, you're trying to communicate a message to other people, show them what you believe, whether they want to hear it or not. And so they're going to put it on their frontage. So yeah, someone might have 10 acres, but they're going to have 100 feet of frontage and they're going to be allowed the same amount as everyone else. Yes, our township varies, but we do have a large amount, majority of LDR, low density residential, but I would say that it's not as much of a concern to me. We would tell them that they're, when it comes to signs, that you're receiving the same treatment as everybody else in the township, and I'm not overly concerned that someone would say, why can't my 200 feet of frontage in my ag district have, 6 32 square foot signs?
I think you might hear that during election season, thinking about like a home on Bauer getting the same amount of sign privileges then as like Visser Farm. I'm just throwing it out there to kind of play devil's advocate or to put a specific location with it, but there's regularly a ton of political signs in that agricultural stretch. And so it seems a little bit strange, and I'm so sorry I interrupted, but I feel like I was piggybacking, but it seems a little bit strange that entire agricultural frontage would have the same limit, if I'm understanding it correctly, as like the next house that is just a small parcel. Is that true, that they would have equal?
Unless it's a divided parcel.
Yeah, so they for the frontage or for the parcel basically, they would have 32 square feet of the signs classified as temporary signs.
Okay. Should we send that back to be cleaned up?
Yeah, I'll be honest, 25.4-15, I think sets him up for a lot of extra work. I think considering, and I understand what we did as far as putting all signs into a temporary bucket, but I think you're setting yourself up for a lot of additional work for that number 15, where temporary signs may be displayed for up to 60 continuous days with at least 30-day gap between the display periods, blah, 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 continue. I know of a lot of ideology signs in the township, both sides. And I think you're going to have neighbors constantly complaining that, it's 61 days. I'm going to go complain. And then the other one's going to complain about them. And I don't know. I think that verbiage right there worries me a little bit there. And if the whole point is First Amendment and protecting First Amendment, I don't like that in there because you have to be out for 60 days, then you got to pull it in for 30 days.
You get your opinion for,
Then
you get your free speech for
60 days and not 365 days.
But if you pull it down after 59, then
Right.
the clock starts again.
Technically not.
if you pull it down and keep it down for 30 days.
gap.
But you could have a version of your sign that has a red background and a version of your ideology sign that has a blue background and rotate them every 2 months. But it's silly that, I mean, you know what I mean? That's the loophole, right? Is you can
Oh, I
still
agree.
have it out full time as long as you're rotating at 59 days.
I'm just trying to look at both sides of the spectrum and protecting both sides.
I mean, that was
And that one worries me for it.
And that was the impetus of this in the first place, was one, strengthening that ability to express the way that you want to express, which you are getting that, and obviously creating some parameters around it without going into every specific situation that could happen. Admittedly, we know there are portions of this that are difficult to enforce. Just like in our current ordinance, there are portions that are difficult to enforce, and we find the best way to do it. And there are certain situations where we say we can't verify that. The sections or the people that are adamant about their neighbors and do complain about weed overgrowth and tree overgrowth and things like that, that creates our enforcement capability because they feel that there's been an affront by some person, and so they're creating our ability to enforce it. Like you said, could it create more work for us? Yes, but I mean, for me at least, I defer to the recommendation from Crystal Morgan on that. I don't know if I can specifically comment on the duration and with respect to some legal precedent that she might have had for that, and with what Rich had said about recommendations for that. So
I think this needs to be done. A lot of hard work has gone into it. I'm uncomfortable, though. I like to see it cleaned up, and I think we've expressed some concerns, particularly the size of a parcel that someone owns.
So let me ask you this question. Does a person with 100 acres get as more votes than a guy with a 100-foot lot? Because that's what it sounds like to me. If a guy has more property, he has more money, he can do more things than a guy has a 100-foot lot. Now it's one vote, one parcel. I'm just saying it. I mean, if a guy built a 100,000 square foot building, he has the same size sign as the guy that has a little building here. That's the sign ordinance. That's what it is. And so, I disagree with the fact that you're trying to say this individual has this much property, so he gets to do something differently than a guy with a smaller piece of property. I disagree with that.
But can I build the same size accessory building as 10 acre of ag in my subdivision?
No, because we have a zoning ordinance that disagrees with that. But you're talking temporary signs here. Your building's going to be there forever. So
I think maybe the difference is the First Amendment nature of it, Michael. I mean, versus like an accessory building, it's not really a constitutionally protected right.
It was like the size or number, not the content.
You have 1,000 feet on a road, and you've got a development you're putting in, and you have one sign. But it would help your business if you could put a few more on there, and the way this is right now, you can't. I don't think it would be difficult to come up with some parameters related to that.
Like subdivision.
Or look at what other areas, other communities have to be dealing with this. And it surprises me that we've had legal experts take a look at this, and this wasn't addressed.
Yeah, like John said, a subdivision with like multiple entrances. So, say Somerset was all done in one shot, and there was 4 or 5 different entrances, and they were selling lots.
But they're different parcels.
But that common area is owned by the developer. Once they're sold, they're separate.
Correct. But if he owns the corner lots on each entrance, he can put a sign on each corner lot. They're separate parcels.
I want to clarify. I appreciate all the time and effort you put into this. There's just those two things that kind of, I'm having a hard time getting over those two.
something Kevin said was he wasn't sure, as you stood here tonight, whether or not Crystal was giving advice on these particular areas of concern that comes from some legal basis, some case or otherwise. It may be a rationale for why it is the way it is. And
I feel like 15 would actually be a potential violation of your First Amendment right. Where 60 days up and then 30 days in, like you're only allowed to have that right for 60 days, and then I don't know. I feel like that one is the one that I worry is the most controversial, I guess you'd say, in that one.
Is that hard to enforce, though? I mean, do you know
I
when they
just don't
put
know how
theirs up and
yeah, I don't know how he would
know that?
know that, because
Right.
if he gets a complaint, say, oh, this has been up for 61 days. I mean, there's no way for us then to be like, oh yeah, I can verify it's 61
Or the
days.
owner says, no, I've only had it up for 58 days.
Yeah.
How can you?
So I'll be back in 2 days. I mean,
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what's going to happen is neighbors are going to start taking date and time pictures of each
that's what
other's
I'm
yards,
thinking.
but
That's what I kind of foresee happening. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. It would not surprise me if that is a running thing then.
would your solution be to have continuous ability to have, I mean, they wouldn't be temporary at that point, but continuous ability to have signs of what nature?
And I think this is where the funneling it all into one is a little different. Because I can understand like the political signs, stuff like that, but like ideology signs, I mean, I'm even looking at my son plays Cub football for Jenison. I've had that sign up for probably 60 days for sure there.
this cute little
It's
helmet
just
or whatever.
yeah, a little helmet with a little Cub football with the name on it. Those, it's
Has
so
anybody
hard.
complained, though?
Nobody's complaining, but somebody could.
I'm going to start complaining about your football hunt. I'm totally
I'll just say it's 59 days and counting.
It seems to me like that up for 60, down for 30, if it was just like it has to be moved every 60 days. Or something like that where we're at least, I don't know, I agree that I don't love that we're limiting somebody's speech after they've made that speech for 60 days. But I'm thinking in the interest of this conversation feels a little bit like it's just on a treadmill, right? Like we're on a merry-go-round right now. I just wonder if there's interest in tabling this with the suggestion being let's revisit it, specifically the 2 points that we have brought up, the square footage of temporary signs and this up for 60 days, down for 30 piece.
25.4-1 and -15 then.
So I would suggest that we table it, giving the advice to Kevin and Rich and Crystal to give it another pass, or planning commission or whoever it is, to give it another pass and send us back a new draft with those two areas for that.
So if you're going to do that, then you've got to come with a suggestion what you want changed, because what you just said does nothing to the planning commission, but you just said we want changes. And the planning commission is going to say, well, we did all these changes. You don't like the changes, so if you want bigger temporary signs, you tell me how big you want them, and then we'll come back. But you can't just say, we're going to table this, and then we want you to redo this. What do you want to redo? You want to go to temporary signs 40 by 40? I mean, you better come up with a size that you want the planning commission to look at, and you better tell me whether or not you want that timeline to be changed. What you want that to be.
I don't have any strong feelings about
Because you
this.
you can say you want to suggest a change, but if you don't suggest what that change is, that what you're suggesting is ambiguous to the planning commission, to Kevin, and to Rich.
Well, that's why I wasn't outright making the motion. I was bringing it up as like what would that process look like, and I really appreciate the input of what we would need to include in that. I don't have a strong feeling about the square footage. I really am fine with what came out of the planning commission compared about square footage, but I hear concerns from others, and I respect that. But my feeling, if we were going to table it and send it back to planning commission, would be that it isn't up for 60 days, down for 30. It is that the sign needs to physically move every 60 days.
Okay. Because when we look at sign sizes, I'll tell you where this conversation goes. Everybody here is saying we gotta look at the size for the sign I want to put up.
Right.
I look at it from the neighbors, gotta look at the sign that you
Yep.
put up. So like, well, 4 by 32 square feet to 4 by 8 sheet of plywood, that's not a bad size sign. But if it's with my neighbor and everybody's got a 4 by 8 sheet of plywood because their house wants, they want to sell their house, you're like, I don't want to look at 6 4 by 8 sheets of plywood across my street. So that's where you look at. Property rights go two different directions. There's the property rights that you own, but there's the property rights across the street that he's on. You know, it's like a bright yellow light. House is better live in it than across from it. You know, there's a difference. So that's why I say, if you want to make changes, I think the planning commission is willing to look at that. We're all willing to look at that, but you need to tell me what you want those changes to be to bring to the planning commission.
I'd like their rationale on why they feel that it should just be the same for everyone, that there shouldn't be. And I'm not saying I would disagree with it, but I'd like to hear their rationale and the rationale on the sizes. Tell them we're concerned, we're uncomfortable.
I think
they clean that up. We respect them.
I can tell you the rationale for the aggregate of 4 by 8. So you get into a plat, and the sighting guy, he puts his sign out there because he's the sighting guy in the front of the house. And then the roofer's got his sign out there, and the realtor's got his sign out there, and the builder's got his sign out there. And then every sub that comes to that job, they put their sign out there. And it's long, you got 25, 30 signs out there, and the people, and it's the last house in the plat, and the other people are like, yeah, we got our house all look nice, and now we got this junkyard across the street with every sign known to man because everybody wants to advertise their little business, all right? So we said, why don't we look at an aggregate of 4 by 8 sheet of plywood, 32 square feet. So if you've got a bunch of 18 by 24 signs, so how many is that fit on a sheet of plywood? 6. So everybody gets 6 people to be able to advertise on that property. And because we're complaint driven, if there's 8 there and nobody says anything, it's fine. It's fine. But you gotta have a place to start. So that's where the 32 square feet came. A 4 by 8 sheet of plywood. You can all picture what a 4 by 8 sheet of plywood goes. Rich, if I'm wrong, tell me, but I'm coming back to this conversation because it's all popping in my head right now because this was 8 months ago. But that's how that came from, was that because we had we did have a few complaints from a few flats. We just had all these just signs everywhere. You go down the street and it's like crazy. But that's where that came from. That's where the conversation came. That's how the planning commission derived to the aggregate of 32 square feet.
I really, Gary, appreciate the perspective of you have to look at it both as the signs that you want and the signs that your across the street neighbor could be putting up in your face. Especially if we have no say over what the content is. Mm-hmm. Like my brain goes to signs full of profanity. Because we've seen those on both sides of the political spectrum, but we've seen signs that have the F word in them or whatever that we can't do anything about. And so I really appreciate that perspective of like we have to be lobbying for the size of our own signs, but also how big of signs we want our kids to see when they walk out the front door of our houses. That is a really helpful perspective for me.
And the conversation of signs, we started kind of really this kind of came after you came on, but the sign sizes were prior. This more was Victor and Rich were trying to clean up our language of this, and then this came on, so we ended up piggybacking them all together. So it ended up being a lot more than what we probably were going to originally propose, and that's why the sign changed, and the Supreme Court came, and everything came at once. So that's kind of where there's so much to discuss.
Kevin and Rich are doing an incredible job. Both work for us. If we send it back to committee and add someone from a planning, and Jerry, you do a wonderful job. Okay. But I'd like to hear, this is going to have such a broad effect on us with free speech. It's going to be challenged over and over again. I'd like to have someone from Planning Commission come and talk to us about it. I don't feel comfortable right now. and I want to feel comfortable.
In what way though? Because the free speech part has been approved by the attorney. You're talking about sign sizes and you're talking about the duration of the sign. Well, the duration, that can be discussed whether we even need that. I don't know. That can, basically if you do, you just basically asking to strike it. So you can make that motion tonight. We want to strike the 60 days, 30 days out, and that's done. The sign size, then you got to tell me what size you want. What changes you want to the size of the signs and why and what in. We can bring that to planning commission.
But if I've got 500 feet on a road, I get one sign or
get one vote.
4x8. I'm uncomfortable with that.
How many parcels in Georgetown Township are you talking about that you're going to be able to do that? I mean, I feel like we're way out in the weeds here trying to discuss these large parcels. We don't have that many large parcels in Georgetown Township anymore. It's all.
We've had political signs much, much larger than 4x8. When it gets into this time of the year, it becomes crazy.
Yeah, I just don't think we have that many cases where somebody's blasting out a ton of signs.
No, we haven't. We haven't had a lot of cases.
That's why it seems like we're creating a solution for a problem that doesn't even exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I know what this is targeted on.
It's in the plats we've had big problems with.
The flags, I'm sure that's what this is based on. So we're creating, instead of selective enforcement, we're selective ordinance to go after a particular person or parcel. Is what this feels like to me. I mean, we could just revert. We don't need to send it to planning. We can just revert to the previous language, which was 80 square feet.
I mean, I'm fine with it going
It's
down.
fine for years, and then
80's big, but 32 seems like a big drastic cut, but that's just me.
So 80 or
32 seems a little drastic. Yeah. That's just me.
Okay, so what if because we can make the change without sending it back to planning commission, true? Okay, so then my motion would be, I'm gonna make a motion and just throw it out there, and if it gets defeated, I don't care. But I would make the motion that we amend what came out of planning commission to double the square footage from 32 to 32 to 64. I don't teach math. Basically, 32 to 64, so that you could have 2 4x8 signs, and remove for temporary signs that have to, after 60 days, come down for 30. I just want it to have to move every 60 days, because that makes it a temporary sign, that it moves. So I'm making a motion that we take what came out of planning commission and change it to 64 square feet and move every 60 days with no 30 days down.
I'll support that.
Kevin, do you have any comments on those thoughts right there?
Not specific to the thoughts. I think you guys are grasping the non-content aspect of this, and credit to the comments that kind of brought us back around to that. I don't know about, just moving them, or just, it seems, I don't know what the purpose of having to say that we're going to just move the sign, or that from the township perspective, hey, that sign's okay because he moved it over a foot. Someone's going to say, well, what's the ordinance and what's the purpose of that? And kind of have to explain, which is my job, but still, that they can just kind of what the purpose of just being able to kind of move the sign after a certain duration.
My purpose was that makes it a temporary sign, not an installation.
Gotcha. Okay.
Not an installation that we're calling temporary, but like legitimately a temporary sign.
Gotcha. Because I think we differentiate our permanent signs by the construction as well.
Okay.
So it would be a little bit different. I think we refer to it a little bit differently, being that it's not on a permanent ground-mounted or freestanding sign, being on a pole or actually mounted to the ground. But I'd say the changes you guys are talking about are honed in on the size, the quantity, things like that. I think you're I'm thinking of 64 square feet of 2x2 signs and 2x4 signs and things like that. But, I mean, that's a consideration to make, because I'm thinking this is an aggregate, correct? 32 aggregate up to 64 square feet aggregate?
Right.
Okay, because that kind of is enabling that situation we were talking about, which 32 square feet of small signs is still not nothing, but 64 is significant. But whatever changes you guys have to make, I do just have to remind us that we have to publish for that language. So I think you guys are understanding that, but we have to publish that language because that was not published to the public 2 weeks in advance that this change in this language was. So that would be an amendment to that language, and then we would republish and come back.
So your motion would have to be that this would go back to the planning commission with those changes.
Okay.
And then we would have to publish it and then discuss it with the planning commission.
So restated. I went for double because I'm thinking like Ryan would want to put up his 4x8 sign for his campaign, but he might also have a couple friends that want their small campaign signs by him. And so that's where my doubling it and poor math skills came from. But I don't know. I feel like we're on a hamster wheel, and I'm just trying to keep the conversation going.
All right, well, there's been a motion, it's been seconded, and we could vote on the motion, albeit it won't be to make anything final if it were to pass. It would be to rather go back to have to republish and eventually come back to us here again, I think, for a final vote at that point in time, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you get a second on your?
Does it need to be a motion? Can we just table it? Gary can report to the planning commission and tell them what our findings were, or they can watch the video. Give them a Post-it note. We have a Post-it note on the desk.
I think I made an amendment and John seconded it, so I think at least something should happen from there.
Can you withdraw your support and withdraw your motion?
So it would go more as a suggestion then to...
Yeah, because it has to go anyway, because I forgot about the posting, public posting.
Yeah. All right, but it would carry less weight if it's, to the extent that those who support it want it to carry more, I guess.
I'd like to see us vote on it and then send it back to them.
This would be a roll call vote.
I think we'll have some mutiny on the planning commission. We'll have some mutiny on the planning commission just regarding our wishes as a board.
This is just to send it, we're voting to send it back to the planning commission for change in the verbiage, primarily 25.4-1 and number 15.
We're voting to send my amendment back to them for consideration and publication for the 2-week period or whatever.
Okay.
Specific to those two things.
Yeah.
Before and it moved.
Because it's just my amendment that is before us right now. We can then decide to table the overall motion, which was to approve the resolution. But I think that if I made an amendment, messed up the math, but Ryan helped me, and then John seconded it, and we both feel like it deserves a vote, then it should get a vote.
What if the planning commission says, well, I don't know about 60 days, we'd like it to move every 30 days?
They're welcome to send it back to us.
So this is just a recommendation, and at that point it doesn't have the force of a directive of the board.
And that's what I'm saying, is
Right.
we're demanding them or we're not.
Is going to be the change, and we're more or less directing that change, or we're just not going to vote on the motion. We're going to say, you know what, go back to planning since we got to republish anyways potentially. Maybe he runs it past Crystal as well as, hey, is there anything we're missing here from a legal perspective on this? Probably not. These sound more like logistic, pragmatic things. And then Gary runs it past them. You get a better rationale. It comes back again. You go, oh, I like that rationale. Okay, I agree with it, Or
Voting on it, we're tying their hands, you're saying?
I think so. Yep. Which, I mean, it's not the end of the world. That's part of what the board...
Would I have to remove my second?
So you'd have to
Withdraw your support.
withdraw her.
Yeah.
I think we're achieving it, and then they have a chance to make the decision. Otherwise, we're locking them in.
Okay.
And I do wonder too,
I'll withdraw it.
is that total square footage both sides? Or, because I know Hudsonville gets really picky with theirs. The front is considered square footage. The back is considered more square footage, not the total square footage of the sign. Do we need to specify that in the ordinance?
far as I know, I believe we do specify that it's just the dimension of that, basically those dimensions of the sign will be the square footage, but
So they can print both sides or one side, doesn't matter?
I refer to Rich, I
Because
guess.
they're like a 4x4 in Hudsonville is considered 32. Oh, yeah. But it's Hudsonville, so yeah, big government. I'm on the people.
Rich, he was kind of calling for your input on that, but I don't think we interpret it that way. What's that? Just be 16, yeah. And Michael's comment is, do we make that clear in there, just in case someone should try to muddy those waters, but.
We're making more out of it than we need to.
There you go. All right.
Right.
All right. Do we? Yeah, I wouldn't think. Okay.
We would then have to vote to table this, correct?
We would.
We would have to, in order to get past it, we have to vote to table it with the recommendations.
Yep.
So John withdrew his support. Did Becky withdraw her motion?
That's fine. Yes.
Yes. So, okay. I recommend that we table this with the recommendations that were on.
Make a motion to table. Support.
Moved and supported. I can get behind the way you presented it tonight. Yeah. Others? Anybody else? We've said our piece, I think. You guys ready to vote on it? Why don't we just call a roll call vote just so we're clear?
Ms. Schwab?
Yes.
Ms. Steele?
It's to table it with my recommendation attached.
Correct.
True? Yes.
Clerk is yes. Supervisor?
No.
Treasurer?
Yes.
Mr. Beldick?
No.
Ms. Grassley?
No.
All right. We'll go back then to planning. And, we welcome, those guys are thinkers and you guys spend considerable time thinking on these things. We appreciate it. And we'll look forward to the consideration of whether or not they think it merits changes.
Does that language give us the discretion to provide something accomplishing those means?
Mm-hmm.
That isn't specifically.
Yeah, it's free range stuff.
Okay.
Just with our recommendation.
Including the potential that they come back and say, you know what, we didn't change anything.
Gotcha. Okay, so
Right.
I just make sure that it wasn't specific to those two.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for all your work.
Okay, item 12 tonight on our agenda, Port Sheldon Complex Parking Lot Resurface Repair. Needs some repairs out there if you've seen it here recently. Came out of services. Is there a motion to approve the low bid there, Eveline Coatings and Surfaces?
So moved. Support.
Who's supported? Any discussion?
The one piece that I would mention is that ASO 616 and Little League have been contributing to an escrow account, and so the money is just sitting there to pay the bill.
Correct.
This isn't something that we're going to be on the hook for and get paid back or anything like that. The money is sitting in an escrow account to cover it.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarification.
That's what I was curious about, because that Port Sheldon complex is kind of is that a county park normally?
It's really interesting because it's in Hudsonville.
Yeah.
But then the county has a piece of it, and then it just essentially we rent it to oversee it. Or what was the exact hierarchy?
Yeah.
Justin, hit us with it.
We own the causeway that goes to the complex. Once you go over the creek, it's in the city of Hudsonville, but we manage it and it's owned by the county.
And it's ran by ASO and Hudsonville Little League.
So many cooks in the kitchen. It's really so it's
Yeah.
good that the money is sitting in escrow and that we don't have to be on the hook.
So what you're saying is we could troll that causeway and we could charge to use it. Is that what you're saying? I see income stream.
All right. Thanks for that clarification, Becky. Any comments? Any other comments, I should say? Okay, hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes. Item 13, 2023 Parks Snow Plow. Is there a motion to place before the board tonight about the snow plow package?
So moved. Support it.
Okay, this came out of services as well.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's the second high bid, right? Yep, barely.
FabTech's a local company, so that's why we're favoring
Got it.
them.
Yeah, okay.
And this will be on the newest truck that we purchased for Park Cemetery.
Gotcha.
Backup truck we approved last week.
Yeah.
Did we get bids to have plowing done?
We're working on that. Bids for plowing. Yep.
Have we worked with Newcomer, FabTech, or B&B before? I don't recall. Any of these? Yeah, which one?
FabTech all the time.
FabTech.
FabTech is local.
Yeah.
Exclusively.
Both local and good track record with us. Okay.
For service too.
Good. Good.
So we are getting bids for snow plowing?
We've requested them, but we're in the time period where no one is excited or in a hurry to give them to us because it wouldn't be for...
Because they're all full for this winter, it'll be for the
would
next
it be
year.
for,
I
24th?
separated them out
Yeah.
between township properties and water sewer, lift stations, pump stations, water towers. And we have so many areas that we have to plow for a company to bring these on. It's hard to build capacity this late in the year. So next spring, if we can't get bids, then next spring we'll try to do it in maybe a longer period of time too.
so, we've reached out, but it's not going to be bids.
They're not responding.
They're not responding yet because it's going to be for next season. So, it's in the works, but it'll take some time.
How many companies have we reached out to?
So far 3 and I haven't got anything back.
We got DJ's, Wabakee, Priest, I think we plow.
Yeah.
I think the Hammer does.
So we'll see what the numbers look like.
Thanks for being on that.
Anything else
If
on
they
FabTech?
respond.
Any other comments on the motion? It was moved and supported, right?
So we got, you broke it into properties, which is connections, this building, library,
Parks, so I did 2 different bid packets. Parks, township properties, cemetery, and I did everything with lift stations, water towers, basically anything on the water sewer side.
So what's the total square foot for lift stations? That's pretty short, isn't it? I mean, like Bauer is literally 30 foot long. Maplewood is 15 foot long.
Some of them are, I guess Joel's here, he can comment, but some of the lift stations are tucked in between 2 houses, where if you have to plow the snow, you have to be very delicate and sensitive to the neighbors of where the snow is plowed.
Do we always plow them?
Yeah.
I say we got 4-wheel drive trucks.
No, we plow them so we can get to them.
We access those daily?
If something goes down in the middle of a blizzard, you don't want to have to plow too.
Correct.
Right.
You know, before that truck, we had to push over put snow and whether the road plows.
You're gonna have a good bank on Rush Creek.
So they can get like.
That's on the corner.
I see.
Yep, so those are always to be cleared so we can have access.
All right. Call for a vote at this time. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, and it passes. Item 14, second public comment period I alluded to before. If anyone here tonight would like to address the board on any subject on your mind, welcome to do so at this time. All right, seeing none, we'll close the second public comment period. Item 15, discussion and general information among the board. Anyone have anything they wish to bring before the board tonight for general discussion?
Just want to reiterate the planning commission, it's a big deal for this renewable energy thing. They're trying to overrun the planning commissions. I think the House might have voted for it already, and I think it's going to Senate. And there's a lot of township pushback on the MTA Michigan Township Association is really pushing back because they don't like the fact the state's taking over the zoning for renewables. So I sent Jim a boilerplate kind of a resolution that all the townships are kind of signing on. Hopefully next meeting maybe we can sign on to that and look at that, because I think it's a big power grab. And the biggest problem is that they're turning over the zoning for renewables to the PSC, which is the unelected body, and so they'll be able to just put a squeaky windmill right next to your house and you don't say anything. So.
Yep. Don't want to see our power usurped. Yep. Our borders.
I see an issue.
Yep. All right, I'll look at that and we'll see if that's something that makes its way to the agenda next time. Any other comments, discussion?
Jerry, I so appreciate that you keep a good pulse on things like that and share them with us, because those are things that should be on my radar and often don't make it, and then you bring those up, so thank you.
That MTA email it's not a very long thread, but there's a lot of little things on it. It's kind of interesting. It's amazing to me how many clerks have quit in the last few months. They can't find clerks. They don't want to deal with this voting thing. I'm happy with Amber and Ryan work on this stuff, but I'm just telling you, there's a lot of clerks. They're looking for clerks to do the voting because they quit.
They are. 14 days. That'll work.
I got a good crew. So. All right.
He's got 4x8 signs he's gonna put up. No, I'm just kidding.
Is there a motion to adjourn? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.